filling this young lad's inbox with a bunch of deranged furry...
And at the same time claiming that this has absolutely no basis in reality.
Niall absolutely has to own up to this. It was just a negligent abuse of power.
That shows that Pyro is well aware that what he's doing is not good.
When I was 19 and 20, I liked to take part in this degenerate furry roleplay with pretty much anyone that would reciprocate. In retrospect, I never should have continued the furry stuff with him once I learned at his age.
Keem is now trying to spread even more bullshit, saying that I'm dating underage girls.
In 2016, Keemstar released a fateful video about a 14-year-old French girl. This coverage became a huge meme within the commentary community as he was unable to get his facts straight. The messages he showed involved Pyro's short relationship with a 14-year-old girl and his willingness to wait until she turned 16, seeing no problem with this behavior. 4 years later, Pyro was accused of grooming by Ivory Rasmus. The allegations consisted of degenerate fat furry DMs and other conversations we will get into later. The point is, Pyro was talking to a 16-year-old for over a year, knowing their age. Unfortunately, this situation snowballed into massive amounts of misinformation being spread. Pyro used this to his advantage and bolstered his response video. History favored him, and by now, Pyrocynical is seen as a degenerate furry, but not much else. What if I told you that's what he wants you to think? As we take off the mask, there is a much more sinister story to tell. This is what we will be delving into in this video. This is the Pyrocynical Files. Before we start, there's something I want to get out of the way. Because of the rampant misinformation swimming around situations involving Pyro, it's important to verify what is true and swat down what isn't. At some points in this video, I will be verifying seemingly obvious details and information in pursuit of this goal. Let's rewind to 2016, a year full of content that isn't as good as you remember looking back. Leafy, Keemstar, Colossal is Crazy, iDubbbz, and of course, Pyrocynical. I won't bore you with his rise to fame for the sake of ad revenue, but it is important to note Pyro's relevance in the commentary community at this time. This led to beefing with Keemstar, causing these allegations to first come to light. Specifically, Pyro's short-lived relationship with a 14-year-old French girl who he wanted to wait for to turn the age of consent. He managed to weasel his way out of these allegations through memeing Keemstar's repeated inconsistency concerning them. On March 22nd, 2016, Keemstar DM'd Pyrocynical asking about the French girl, to which Pyro denies the allegations. A while later, Pyro posts a rant against Keemstar, lambasting his coverage of the popular creator Tobuscus's rape allegations. Compared to how tense things would later get, this video was fairly lighthearted with fair criticism sprinkled throughout it. In response, however, Keemstar dropped multiple Twitter videos, including the infamous "I have files on top of files" clip. He directly threatened to leak the allegations over being criticized, already painting himself to be motivated by emotion and potentially unreliable. Unfortunately, Keemstar made it even worse though, repeatedly flipping the ages of the French girl, unable to be consistent with the allegations, making them seem even more flimsy and potentially even fake. In response, Pyro drops my experience with Keemstar, harping on his inconsistencies and claiming the entire story to be bullshit.
This story is total bullshit. I know exactly the 3 individuals who told Keem and even got in a Skype group chat with him. Unfortunately, I can't name these twats because that's exactly what they want, attention. But in case you don't believe me, I have a DM conversation between one of the individual's ex-girlfriends who's shown that he actually has no idea what he's talking about and he's literally just making stuff up to spite me.
2 days later, Keemstar posted DMs between Pyro and the French girl on Twitter. Pyro tweeted out, "I see no problem waiting for somebody to reach the age of consent," as if not understanding the prior relationship makes this very wrong. He then flees to a subreddit, a hug box obviously blindly supporting him, for his full response, where he passively admits the DMs are real. Despite admitting their validity, Pyro simultaneously denies they were ever dating, even though the DMs prove them to be. Pyro also claims she was 15, despite Lou's insistence, and proof from publicly accessible posts at the time that she was 14. The relationship itself lasted 2 weeks and ended in 2015. It is reasonable to assume Pyro knew that Lou was 14, giving her saying it publicly multiple times on Twitter and being well known amongst large creators. This time, Pyro doesn't have the excuse of the Twitter suspension, something I will touch on later. Further, Lou maintained her age as 14 later in her interview with Keemstar.
So I met Pyro back in 2015 when I was 14 years old and he was 18 years old. I guess we'll have known each other for like a few months before this happened. In DMs, we did start maybe a little bit flirting, saying that, well, we like each other's personalities, and he appreciates what I do for him, and I appreciate his company.
You know, he said that, like, you know, he never dated you, like that you weren't his girlfriend. But were you boyfriend and girlfriend?
Yeah, we were.
In the sense of, like, e-dating, right? Because you never met each other in real life, but you were e-dating online.
Exactly.
Looking back at the DM leak, these screenshots also show the two arguing over the reason for breaking up, with the French girl alleging he did it because he did not want to be seen as a pedo. Pyro argued against this, but it is understandable why she brings up this point, given Pyro was 18 at this time of his short-lived relationship with this 14-year-old. One of the most important takeaways from the French girl situation is that Pyro will only admit to points against him when they have already been proven, and will downplay, obfuscate, and lie about the details surrounding his involvement. This will only continue to be shown as the video goes on. After dodging such a bullet though with these allegations, you think Pyro would ask for people's ages before he engages in sexual or romantic conversations with them, but not even a month later, he begins talking to Ivory. As I said in the intro, in 2020, Pyro got accused of grooming by Ivory Rasmus. Ivory showed egregious messages between the two when he was 15 and Pyro was 19, continuing on to even when Ivory was 16 and Pyro was 20. They met in Solid Tribe's Discord server, an ex-YouTuber with over 10,000 subscribers Ivory was apparently friends with. It was alleged they met in an 18+ Discord server, but this is untrue, corroborated by a leaked Discord call. Pyro himself never even attempted to make this claim, showing its absurdity, and Solid Tribe, the owner of the server, was 15 at this time. Back then, Pyro's Discord username was lol, verified by the message logs. On November 10th, 2016, Pyro and Ivory first began DMing. It started innocently enough when Ivory linked his YouTube channel. The next day, he sang about E-Fame in a server call jokingly. This would be used against Ivory to claim he was making these allegations for clout, but as I just explained, it was very clearly a joke. I'll let you see for yourself. Following this call, unfortunately, the degenerate DMs would quickly multiply. As I talk about the DMs, I will show the most relevant to the situation that are included in the document. However, if you want to see them all unedited, there is a screen recording of the conversations on YouTube I will link in the description. These DMs display a multitude of sexual topics exchanged between the two. They talked about how nice the furry characters looked, going into explicit detail about their passions towards the furry characters. They sent one another furry content ranging from cringe to obscene. These messages began when Ivory was 15 and continued until he was 17. It is important to note, Ivory never explicitly told Pyro his age when they first began their exchanges. However, Pyro never asked. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence suggesting Pyro knew Ivory's age, and we'll get into those later. Regardless, it is not enough to make a definitive conclusion, as more up into interpretation as to whether he knew. That being said, Ivory did link Pyro's Twitter when he was 16, with Pyro being 20. After this, the degenerate behavior continued without pause. I'm now going to delve more specifically into the timeline from the start. Going back to 2016, when Ivory was 15, the two started conversating more frequently. After sharing music, Pyro later on asked if Ivory had Skype, with him sharing the information to get in touch there. Pyro sends a interesting image of a furry, with Ivory captioning it thick. They discuss calling, but it never pans through. And then, the first of many furry inflation fetish art is sent, spiraling the conversation into sending furry content ranging from strange to disturbing and lewd. Pyro again presses calling, saying, "I can call in 10 minutes if you want, N-word." March 11, 2017, they had their first Discord call for over an hour. Pyro and Ivory would fantasize over their in the conversations, gauging sexually over their sonas, and Pyro ending it with, "I'm gonna bust a nut." At some point into their conversations, Pyro and Ivory said "I love you," and Ivory consistently called Pyro BB, with Pyro affectionately referring to him as Plump Boy. Flirting was almost constant around this time. All the while, Ivory continuously mentions about being in school. Pyro should have seen this as a red flag, but instead, he continued their exchanges. Continuing on, Pyro says, "I love how you keep saying ooh woo haha," and calls Ivory a scaly boy XOXO, with Ivory replying okay XOXO. Things move on with Ivory describing the ending to a game he he was playing, saying it made him tear up, with Pyro responding, "My poor baby." On April 5th, 2017, Pyro and Ivory would have a conversation about video games. Pyro states, "You got Dark Souls?" with Ivory saying they don't have it, but they will buy it soon. Pyro then stated, "I'll game with ya." They played together as shown by Ivory's screenshot, which was put on Twitter by Pyro's request. Although this might seem like a superfluous detail, it is very important, as Pyro would claim in his response video he was not accessing Twitter during this period, when he clearly was, as he linked Ivory's tweet.
This is something I said in my original Reddit statement. He never once disclosed the fact that he was 15 at the time these exchanges commenced. He didn't include his age in his bio until he was 16, but I was not on Twitter between the 28th of December 2016 until the 29th of June 2017, as I was suspended.
It became so close that Pyro knew Ivory's real name and called him odd pet names like Child, My Small Boy, Plump Boy, and Daddy. More furry porn is sent between the two following this, with Pyro exclaiming, "I could nut to that, to be honest." And they engaged in sexting via talking about their sonas and engaging in the fetish roleplay. Towards the end of this exchange, Pyro talks about how he has always had an attraction to plump boys and such, which is strange given his referring to Ivory as plump boy multiple times. Pyro goes to bed after, with Ivory saying he was fine with everything last night, but wasn't sure if he was. And Pyro responding that he was, but my kinks are just fucked up. As this goes on, Ivory shares that he has to go to school in about an hour. As we go through the rest of the DMs, unfortunately something will be missing: Pyro's side of the conversation. This is because Pyro eventually deleted his side sometime after being given the means to do so by user Thaf9 in 2018. The first time he discussed deleting DMs was actually earlier with Ivory himself, when discussing someone who leaked Pyro's old Skype. Ivory also talks about deleting DMs on his side, but appears to have kept them instead. He talked about deleting DMs for a second time before he learned how to do so from Thaf9 on January 15th, 2018, when he crashed out fearing his furry fetish would be exposed. In his crash out, he mentions Keemstar and his worries of others leaking DMs. He also mentions he never asked for news or anything like that. In contact to his response, this is strange, considering he said he saw no issue because Ivory was 16, the age of consent in his country and Ivory's state. To me, this reads as Pyro worrying about Keem leaking a conversation he had with another minor outside of the French girl. He still messaged Ivory discussing sexual topics in August, and Ivory messaged him about the thick message in 2019. Ivory talked about the person that leaked Pyro's old Skype, Sleepy, a year prior as well, talking about turning on two-factor authentication and potentially deleting DMs. I think he was afraid of Sleepy leaking their logs after he allegedly leaked Pyro's old Skype. In both cases, Pyro was worried about his DMs being leaked, once explicitly with Ivory and once in the second instance, as they were still confirmed to be messaging past the Thaf9 DMs. Pyro's excuse for deleting the DMs is complete bullshit. If he cared so much about his fetish getting leaked, he would have wiped the logs completely. In my opinion, given the evidence provided, Pyro deleted the evidence to make himself look better. As for what he kept, there's no explicit evidence proving he knew Ivory was 15 at that point. I think when Pyro said it takes one person to create a chain reaction, he was referring to Ivory, worrying that if he came out about his experience, others he shared degenerate DMs with would also come forward. In May of 2017, there were talks of Ivory and Pyro hanging out IRL. Ivory talks about the potential need to make a fake ID or sneak into the event, as I think I looked that age. Pyro said this was in reference to a copy and paste invitation that was sent around for a UK meetup, and says this explanation about the fake is only for getting past the doorman outside bars. This is concerning because Pyro claims that he only found out about Ivory's age when he linked his Twitter bio, but this example shows Ivory clearly implying he is a minor, given the UK's legal drinking age being 18. This should be a red flag for Pyro, but instead, 2 days later, Ivory is right back to talking how they usually do in their sexual furry conversations, even though Pyro likely knew he was underage. The day before Ivory linked his Twitter profile, on July 4th, 2017, Ivory talks about his IRL sex life. These DMs show their conversations were not just furry fetish garbage, as he tries to aggressively assert in his response video.
It was just purely fantasy garbage. It was roleplay after all. You're just pretending. I didn't consider the age gap significant enough because what we were talking about and doing was so far removed from actual sex. It literally was just fantasy furry garbage because I didn't consider Ivory sexual in any way in person. But this never escalated from two morons talking about inhaling furry fart. I'm straight, IRL, like, I have no interest in guys. This is just purely, like, a weird fantasy, and it does not carry over into the real world whatsoever.
They talk about Iroh's sexual situations with Pyro potentially engaging in the conversation. From the school messages, to them being on call, the ID situation, to even knowing their real name, Pyro should have reasonably known Ivory was underage, yet he claims not to have. Pyro also lied in his response, saying he was not on Twitter between December 28th, 2016 and June 29th of 2017, as he was suspended. However, Pyro linked a tweet from Ivory on April 4th of 2017. There were multiple tweets of Ivory stating his age before this tweet was sent, at least 8 of them. This all occurred when Ivory was only 15. Pyro references specific tweets multiple times on his YouTube channel when he was supposedly not on it, namely how to grow your YouTube channel on May 1st, 2017.
The only tweet I could find that had any relevance: guys, I go for a few days on Holy Day, so I can't upload. I'm sorry. Have a nice day, guys. That was his last tweet, so I can only make out that he went to heaven. All the views just crushed him. When he opened that paycheck that YouTube gave him, he was suffocated in money.
And why left BuzzFeed on May 7th, 2017.
Stop. Hello, creature. How are you? I'm gonna fondle you. Don't bite me. Don't bite me. Don't do it. If you do it, I'll tell my mum, and I'll get you suspended on Twitter.
Shit, Gunny.
Twitter. Meanwhile, I say the word weed or lol and I get suspended instantly. I think easily the worst thing about being suspended is the fact that you're almost locked in a cage with a nice glass mirror so you can see all of Twitter. You can't tweet anything, you can't post anything, you can't interact with anyone, you can't even see your DMs anymore, but you're allowed to see your notifications. And you know what happens when you get suspended? You will see brainlets, just absolute brainlets, arguing over a post you made like 2 years ago, mate.
This is only circumstantial evidence of him potentially knowing Ivory's age, but it begs the question, why lie about being off Twitter? It is entirely possible Pyro knew his age, but there's no concrete proof. Even after all this new proof Parlo laid out, Pyro still has plausible deniability, especially considering most of Ivory's tweets mentioning his age are replies rather than posts themselves. Throughout the DMs between Pyrocynical and Ivory, there is one consistency outside of the degenerate fetish roleplay: Ida. Ida was a mutual friend of Pyro and Ivory, who later began dating Pyro in 2019. Ida was known for a fat fetish artist. Beyond this though, she is an important piece of the equation, as their DMs with Ivory poke more holes into the claims Pyro makes in his response video. So let's dig into the DMs. In the first image, Ivory explains that Ida knowingly sent him fat furry fetish content when he was a minor, which he then sent to Pyro. Next, Ivory shared commission artwork of his Honor Sona Ida made for him with Pyro, which he called cute. After that, Ivory asked Pyro if he wants to play Dark Souls 3, while he and Ida were on call together. Ida has tweeted about streaming with Pyro and Ivory multiple times, with other creators such as Solid Shibe. She streamed with Ivory showing her commissions as well. These just establish Ivory and Ida's pre-existing friendship, but later DMs get more sinister. The following message shows Ivory venting to Ida about his relationship with Pyrocynical. He is contemplating asking Pyro to be in a relationship with him, but worries he wouldn't want to because of his age and potential regret. This directly contrasts Pyro's narrative of just sending the furry stuff. When Ivory thanked Pyro for suggesting he would pay for a booking at a hotel, he responded, "What did Ida tell you?" with Ivory confirming we were talking about it and such. As you can see, this confirms there was a chain of communication between Ida, Pyro, and Ivory, with them talking about one another to each other in DMs. Ivory talked about Pyro, and Ida shared personal details with the two. It's important to mention it's unknown whether or not Pyro was booked in the hotel for Ivory or Ida, but I'm leaning more towards Ida. However, Ivory was excited for this event nonetheless, and it was one of the last DMs preserved between the two before Pyro wiped his side of the conversation. On top of this, Ivory, Ida, and Pyro were all in a group chat together, as well as inviting Pyro to join a Discord call with Ida and somebody else. A second time, Ivory is even seen stating something he heard from Ida, as he said that he heard that Pyro and Ida were gonna watch It. This goes on further to show the chain of communication they all had with each other. Now, outside of the obvious, showing Ivory and Pyro were closer than he claimed, what is the importance of Ida? In his response, Pyro claims he wasn't close to Ida around the time of the Ivory situation.
Soon to be, but like, it's a whole 2 years before we actually start dating, and 2 whole years before this conversation took place. I mean, we both talked before, but we weren't close. She had no reason to confide with me with someone else's private information. So back when Ivory opened up to Ida about something private, there is no guarantee that she would have came and told me, despite the fact that this document and videos based off this document claim it as concrete, irrefutable proof.
As DMs with Ivory and Ida started in 2017 show, she claims her and Pyro call almost every other day. Pyro constantly downplays the extent of his relationship to his own benefit throughout his response, as shown by his relationship with both Ida and Ivory. When Ivory went public about his experience with Pyro, Ida went to his DMs and essentially victim blamed him. Even Pyrocynical disagreed with us and expressed distaste towards Ida's approach. I only want to highlight it to show that obviously blaming Ivory in this situation is wrong before we move on. After concretely learning Ivory's age, Pyro's messages with him did not stop and continued exactly the way they had before, knowing their age. Pyro continued engaging in the sexual-free conversations. This included the roleplay and discussing NSFW images he received in graphic detail. The roleplay escalated into a conversation about a private commission of an artist drawing the two personas together, with Pyro offering to pay for it. Around this period, there's another discussion of meeting up, made far more egregious considering Pyro now definitively knows Ivory's age. Ivory brings up getting some UK friends together, inviting Pyro to join. It is unknown if he actually agreed to go, but in context, it is reasonable to assume Pyro was somewhat considering it, asking for more details. Further into the conversation, Ivory talks about a sexual conversation he had with a different guy, marking the second time they discuss an IRL situation. The conversations continued through 2018 even, with Ivory sending more fat images and discussing other things. He asked Pyro if he ever to his personas NSFW, with Ivory saying, "Wait, you did? God bless." At the same time, Ivory admits as well that he nodded in the past to the furry content Pyro had sent him as well. This goes on to prove that both Pyro and Ivory were deriving sexual pleasure from these conversations IRL, if it wasn't already apparent. This goes on to prove that it was a lot more than two morons talking about farts, where it was just pretend, as Pyro asserts. Pyro and Ivory were engaging sexually with their explicit fantasies. Moving on, messages go until 2019, with Ivory asking Pyro to send thick, as he hasn't gotten any in a while. At the end of this chapter, I think it's safe to say that what is displayed here with the Ivory allegations is a deranged freak that used a 16-year-old for his own sexual gratification at the age of 20. Pyro unfortunately used the discrediting of the groomer label to throw out all of the questionable and gross behavior in his response. While these allegations were in full effect, he then went to Reddit to respond to them, making a undoubtedly horrible statement. Gamers, I'd like to take this opportunity to address a false allegation recently made against me on Twitter. As some of you may have seen, it has been claimed back in 2016, when I was 19 years old, that I groomed an individual who was 15 years old at the time. I want to set the record straight with all of you and share the truth. This accusation is 100% false and incredibly irresponsible. I'm not denying that in the past, I took part in conversations with others that many of you will understandably consider to be weird and distasteful, probably an understatement. It was careless of me not to consider who was behind the roleplay, art sharing, and I take full accountability. But these exchanges never amounted to anything other than fantasy roleplay. I've never sent or solicited or IRL content. I've never tried to engineer an illicit encounter or lure anybody into anything. I've never built a dialogue, connection, or relationship with the intention of manipulating or exploiting anyone. This was even confirmed by Ivory himself in an interview, YouTube link. Though Pyro is telling the truth about the nudes were exchanged, he neglects to mention the fact that Ivory says Pyro manipulated him, which is how he came to the conclusion that Pyro groomed him. He stayed stalwart on this point throughout his interview. Whether I agree with the label of groomer or not, the statement of Ivory confirming everything he wrote in this section of his response is a downright lie. Even Pyro's repeated point that it is only fantasy roleplay is deceptive and intentionally downplays what really went on between them. In the archives that still exist with both sides, when role-playing, hyper-specific sexual acts are talked about by both parties. Calling the exchanges just roleplay makes it seem like the two were taking part in a D&D game together, or describing their personas having a tea party together, rather than the degenerate filth that actually occurred. He never at any point stated that he felt uncomfortable, and if he did, I never would have continued to message and respond to him. Every exchange between Ivory and I was fully consensual and reciprocal. I recognize I'm saying the obvious, but a minor cannot consent by definition. And this is made worse by Pyro being 20 at the time. It is insane to me that anybody would be able to take this point seriously. He never once disclosed the fact that he was 15 at the time that these exchanges commenced. He didn't include his age in bio until he was 16, but I was not on Twitter between the 28th of December 2016 until 29th of June 2017, as I was suspended. As we know by now, this point is a blatant lie. From the 2 videos on his channel during the alleged time he was not on Twitter, to the DM he sent Ivory with a Twitter link, there is more than enough evidence to show this is not true. It's clear he lied on this point. Moreover, individuals have since come forward contending that Ivory would be disingenuous about his age to proactively gain entry to other fantasy roleplay groups. Imagery link. I'm really confused about Ivory's inconsistency. This is evidence to suggest that he engaged in fantasy roleplay with another individual similar in age to me. This individual was also not aware of Ivory's age at the time, but in this particular example, it was. Ivory, who very much initiated and directed the roleplay. In the link Pyro provided in his response, he shows a Twitter user that claimed Ivory lied about his age to both Pyro and his own friends. The issue with this? Firstly, Pyro himself knew this claim wasn't true. Secondly, this user was clearly trying as hard as they could to prove that, claiming he was a clout chaser on top of alleging Ivory lied. The clout chasing argument comes from the joke E-Fame song I already played earlier, the false 18+ Discord server claims, and the testimony. It doesn't take a detective to figure out how retarded this Twitter thread is. However, Pyro takes on the thread? I'm really confused by Ivory's inconsistency. Pyro's own fallacies are the last confusing part of the situation, however. Pyro used the first thread on top of another, claiming Ivory engaged in roleplay with someone else who, in Pyro's words, was a similar age to him. Naturally, this is a very stupid point. Just because another adult was as reckless and irresponsible as Pyro, it doesn't make Ivory at fault for either situation, nor does its inclusion change anything about this. On top of everything, one of the creators of the thread later retracted their claims, making them null. Of course, Pyro never revises his statement to note this. Pyro knowingly bolstered misinformation in his response to discredit Ivory and pay him to be a liar and a clout chaser. The irony of him claiming, "I'm not here to personally attack anyone," after platforming false claims about Ivory and painting him to be a false accused and clout-hungry loser should not be lost at all. After Ivory alleged that I groomed him, this individual then reached out to him to apologize for any hurt he may have inadvertently caused him, to which Ivory responded, "No, you're fine, I don't care." Why does he not care in this instance? Why does he remain unaffected by a similar interaction with others, yet felt the need to single me out and character assassinate only me on social media? Regardless of how Ivory feels about that situation, if the evidence and facts show someone's actions to be reprehensible, it's still condemnable. If he is angry, confused, or sad as he claims to be, why has he been in friendly contact with me right up until September of this year? Imagery link. During the interview mentioned earlier, he was confronted with evidence that he had sent card to somebody else. He intentionally claims it was him, but then backtracks, claiming he has no recollection. This section is merely deflecting, attempting to attack Ivory so he can distract from what he did. From his dishonesty and misinformation to his mudslinging, this is a laughably bad response to serious allegations. Whether or not Pyro is in the right for refuting the claims of grooming specifically is irrelevant, because it does not disregard his already proven abhorrent behavior. This Reddit essay only further exemplifies Pyro's pattern of deflecting, lying, and obfuscating, but his video responding to the claims is somehow even worse. Pyro made a video response to the Ivory allegations titled "My Response." It should be unsurprising at this point in the video it contains multiple instances of Pyro lying and downplaying the situation. Within 30 seconds, Pyro is already demonstrating his status as a generational capper when he says he thought the evidence provided in his first response was enough, despite the fact almost the entire response was spent maligning Ivory and spreading misinformation about him, with the only thing pertaining to Pyro himself being his downplaying the severity of his fantasy roleplay with the 15 to 16-year-old.
I originally made a response on my subreddit, and I truly believed the evidence I provided was enough. And for a time it was.
He then claims he never lied at any point, even though I've already proved he has multiple times. In addition to combating Ivory's post, he also responds to a Google document Turkey Tom made. In doing this, he is able to conflate a lot of what Ivory said with Tom's document, and blame Tom for things he never actually said. He calls the doc disingenuous and manipulative, which makes it sound like he's speaking about his own Reddit response.
I just want to be clear, I have never lied at any point. This document is disingenuous, manipulative, and it fails to include so much of my original statement.
Pyro admits to engaging in degenerate furry roleplay with pretty much anyone who would reciprocate. I'm not going to speculate on the potential of him roleplaying with other minors, but it still goes to show Pyro was operating extremely recklessly and irresponsibly, and something like the Ivory situation was bound to happen.
For those who haven't read the entirety of my original response, let me give a little background. When I was 19 and 20, I liked to take part in this degenerate furry roleplay with pretty much anyone that would reciprocate.
Around 2 minutes into the video, we see the infamous claim from Pyro that it was just pure fantasy garbage. There are naturally a few things wrong with this claim. When imagining fantasy roleplay and addressing claims of potential sexual misconduct, one pictures something innocent or silly. However, the roleplay between the two involved explicit sexual acts, fantasizing about body parts, and even discussed nutting to some of the images sent between them. Regardless of whether this was rooted in reality, it was not as innocent as Pyro attempts to frame it as. On top of this, when Pyro had multiple instances of reasonable suspicion that Ivory was underage, Ivory spoke in detail about his IRL sex life. This is yet another point of stripping away Pyro's excuse of pure fantasy.
And looking back on it now, the word cringe, that doesn't near do enough justice to how sad this all was. These conversations never led to any news being exchanged. It was just purely fantasy garbage.
Pyro harps on the fact that no nudes were exchanged, and separately lumps the two claims into one, while having a clip of Ivory's interview back him up. He says no nudes were exchanged, and it was just purely fantasy garbage, making it seem like Ivory agreed with both, when that is clearly not the case.
Never led to any nudes being exchanged. It was just purely fantasy garbage, something which Ivory himself confirms.
Did he ever ask you?
No.
No.
Pyro maintains he did not lie within his Reddit post, and he had absolutely no idea that Ivory was 15 when their exchanges started. As we've discussed multiple times up to this point, there is reasonable suspicion on several accounts to indicate Ivory was underage, and while Pyro is able to claim this, given his other lies, it certainly puts this point into skepticism. He also makes the point that Ivory never disclosed his age, which is true, but naturally, the impetus to check the age of who he is engaging in sexual roleplay with is on the adult, not the child.
It was entirely my responsibility to verify his age before having these conversations, and the fact that I didn't, that is so incredibly negligent of me to do so. I may have been young myself, but still old enough to know better. But let me be very clear, I had absolutely no idea that he was 15. I absolutely did not lie in my original Reddit post, and I would like to emphasize that.
Pyro makes the point to say that Ivory was perfectly cool with him up until September, to discredit his claims even further, and to attempt to paint him as a clout chaser. He tries to make Ivory's allegations even more severe, claiming he was attempting to expose him as a sexual predator who knew his age all along. However, Ivory only claimed he knew his age all along, not that he was a sexual predator. He does this so he can confidently say both of these are untrue, when one of them was never alleged in the first place. Pyro loves setting up straw men, representing his opponents to make himself seem more innocent.
Ivory himself did not disclose to me directly that he was 15. And the evidence itself supports this too. Up until September this year, I'd be perfectly cool with him. We were still speaking and still on very good terms. However, for one reason or another, he felt the need to come out about these allegations. To expose that I'm a sexual predator, I took advantage of him, and I knew his age all along. This is all untrue, and I am amazed how out of proportion this is all blown up.
Pyro enlisted the help of his friend Colossal's Crazy to read out the DMs Pyro describes as more damning. He reads them out in a silly bodacious way, which makes them seem more like cringe rather than serious sexual roleplay conversations. I don't think Colossal is to be blamed in this situation, but it is certainly an intentional strategy to further downplay the severity of what he did. It also shows that other gigantic YouTubers were on Pyro's side.
Several of our conversations were leaked online by Ivory. Here's one of the more damning ones.
I'd love for my Sona to be licking at his fat, sweaty ass while rubbing his belly from behind, and then just having him gas all over my Sona's face. That would be so nice. Or if mine was just underneath him, getting underneath his huge belly, and your Sona could be non-stop as he f***s mine like... Huh?
At 4 minutes and 15 seconds, Pyro says, "You got me. Now the whole world pretty much knows what I took off to." This directly contradicts the claim a lot of his response hinges on. That is, fantasy completely detached from realization or reality, which he goes back to when he says at 7 minutes and 15 seconds that there was no sexual interest there.
He's provided a lot of proof like this to show how much of a degenerate I was, and I mean, I agree, you know, you got me. Now, the whole world pretty much knows what I jack off to, but what he and no one else has done is come close to substantiating how this constitutes as grooming. I mean, yeah, we shared some fat furry art, we had some weird fantasy roleplay, but there was no sexual interest. There were no nudes exchanged, his name, his appearance, it wasn't important to me. I didn't even know what he looked like at this point. I mean, if he linked me a picture or something, I would have forgotten it because it was just that irrelevant to me.
As I have stated multiple times, although there is no explicit proof Pyro knew Ivory was 15, it is very strange of him to hinge on a proven lie that he was not on Twitter. It just goes to show the extent of Pyro's willingness to lie, even when it's not needed. He could have just said that there was no proof and he did not see these tweets, but he commits himself to saying he was not on Twitter at all.
So if I'm so sure that I didn't know he was 15, how would I have missed this? This is something I said in my original Reddit statement. He never once disclosed the fact that he was 15 at the time these exchanges commenced. He didn't include his age in his bio until he was 16, but I was not on Twitter between the 28th of December 2016 until the 29th of June 2017, as I was suspended. It would have been a hell of a lot less likely for me to see all but one of these tweets that's been used as evidence in this Google Doc.
He does concede and say he should have never continued the furry roleplay with him once he learned of his age, but immediately downplays it when he explains Ivory was the legal age of consent, both where Pyro lived and Ivory's state of Pennsylvania. He claims it was so far removed from actual sex, despite, again, just a few minutes earlier talking about jerking off.
The age in bio says 16. This is something I acknowledged in my Reddit post, but to be fair, I probably didn't elaborate enough on it. In retrospect, I never should have continued the furry stuff with him once I learnt of his age, even though at the time I didn't see it as a problem. Legally, age of consent is 16 in both my country and his state. I didn't consider the age gap significant enough because what we were talking about and doing was so far removed from actual sex. It literally was just fantasy furry garbage because I didn't consider Ivory sexual in any way in person.
As we've already discussed, he lies about his closeness with Ida in order to legitimize his claims he could not have learned of Ivory's age, saying they weren't close. Although it is still plausible Ida would not have openly discussed Ivory's age with him, I proved multiple times that they were decently close while all of this was going on.
So here they're trying to make it seem impossible I wouldn't have known his age or had to do some kind of like insane mental gymnastics to never find out. But if you look at the DMs Ivory provided himself for this document, you can see that he's confiding with Ida about age being a problem. Keep in mind as well, I was not in a relationship with Ida until about mid-2019. This document claims it as soon to be, but like, it's a whole 2 years before we actually start dating, and 2 whole years before this conversation took place. I mean, we both talked before, but we weren't close. She had no reason to confide with me with someone else's private information.
He further clarifies that the thread trying to prove his innocence was not actually retracted, but regardless, it is complete bullshit, as he relies on testimony in a call that proves nothing. He further clarifies he never made the claim Ivory lied about his age, but he might as well have, because he signal boosted that narrative and used it as a point of argument against Ivory.
On top of that as well, the person who made the thread defending me recently came out and said at no point did he actually apologize for making that thread, and his words have been twisted and put in this document to be used against him. The reason why I used these Twitter screenshots against him is the fact that I felt his accusations came from a place of dishonesty. We spoke casually on and off until September of this year. I provided screenshots of our conversations that were posted in my Reddit statement. There was no bad blood, and then when other people came out on Twitter saying that they also had dishonest experiences with him, I used that to further my own belief that these accusations were made for the sake of it. Me including the anecdotal evidence led to the belief that Ivory lied about his age. That is never a claim I have made that he has done to me. I've only said that I did not know his age at 15.
Pyro also makes the argument he deleted the DMs because he didn't want people finding out about his degenerate fetishes, even though he already previously admitted the age gap was a bad thing, throwing his exclusionary reasoning into question.
Now, this is a good time actually to discuss a Discord conversation that was leaked, where I'm asking someone for a way to like mass delete Discord messages. Very obvious explanation. I was shit scared of the public finding out that I was a complete degenerate.
At 16 minutes and 50 seconds, Pyro combats the claim he lied with, "I have never actually changed my story from my original post." Obviously both can be true, and this does not disprove him lying whatsoever.
Documents like these only try to show one side and build a narrative that I'm a liar when I have never actually changed my story from my original post. My mistake, if anything, was not being clearer. I have never tried to hide anything.
At 17 minutes and 57 seconds, Pyro shows the rest of the DM conversation, exhibiting Ivory doing free roleplay with a person of similar age to Pyro. He accidentally hurts his own argument though, showing a message which was maliciously left out where Ivory said he needed some space. This is important because Pyro claimed Ivory did not care what another alleged adult did to him, but him needing space shows he had some level of negative feelings towards the interaction.
They then show a screenshot that I posted of Ivory talking about the cringer furry stuff with someone else. Ivory then posted the rest of the conversation on Twitter, and it really doesn't change the narrative much, apart from adding that he wants to be left alone. At the time, I felt it was more than fair that I show an example of Ivory having a similar conversation with someone else, and how he wasn't affected by it as he claims he was with me. He still excused the guy, there was no call-out post on him, and I think it was fair to question that, like why didn't he see a problem?
Pyro ends his shit show of a response with apologizing to Ivory, and it is very difficult to take this or any of his accountability seriously, where he continuously lied, downplayed, and mischaracterized everyone else involved to make himself seem more innocent.
Now, I do want to directly say something to Ivory and apologize to him and to anyone else that I did the furry roleplay garbage with. What seemed consensual and reciprocal may very well not have been. It's not my place to decide. It happened. It was my responsibility to verify age, and I never did, and I am sorry for that. You shouldn't have been put in that situation, and it was stupid of me to message people about this furry stuff without taking into account the influence of my platform, especially considering how the tone of these messages were.
2 months ago, Pyro responded to a lengthy document summarizing the allegations we have already talked about, along with mentioning new allegations I will cover in a minute. It was not official, and was instead quickly addressing the document on a stream where he was gearing up to play a game. Pyro says he was waiting for this document to come out, and he is going to treat the same way he treated his previous allegations. He said he will let other YouTubers say their piece about it, meaning he will do exactly what he did the last time, setting up strawmen of extremity and responding easily to claims that were never made. He even highlights his previous strategy, talking about how he used YouTubers' responses in his own video.
I did that with the original video. I remember in the original response video when YouTubers like had their say and stuff, and then I used that in my actual response video as well. So it's just like, it's a waiting game for this document to come out, and now it's another waiting game to see, like, for everyone to have their piece to say, basically.
Pyro says his only options are to put his head under the sand and to sit in his apartment all day gooning, or continue how he is. But by not responding, he is electing to do both, gooning included.
So it's just another waiting game, you know? And I got two choices now. I basically put my head under the sand and I stop working, and then my employees suffer because they can't get paid, you know? And I just like sit in my apartment gooning all day, or I just keep working until until it comes to that point. There's really not much else I could do in this situation apart from, just waiting for, every single YouTuber to come out. I mean,
now that we have covered his response, what is the document he felt the need to address in the first place? On August 12th, 2025, popular Roblox YouTuber Parlo released a whopping 300-page doc on Pyrocynical, including subjects I have already covered, like the French girl and Ivory, but also included new allegations which are unproven and unsubstantiated in some of the cases. I'm not going to spend too long talking about the doc itself, outside of saying there is absolutely zero reason it had to be this long. Parlo has a tendency to loop and talk about the same point over and over again and act like it's a new one, which only weakens the arguments he's trying to put forward. Similar to his video, which was premiered on YouTuber Himpleton's livestream, Parlo cannot help repeating himself and extends both his document and his video's runtime egregiously. Unfortunately, this is the unintended side effect of losing most viewers' interest, which is a shame due to the obvious severity of Pyro's conduct and dishonesty. On top of this, Parlo is very assumptive despite his full understanding of how Pyro treated the Keemstar French girl allegation. When it comes to Pyro, what is claimed must be airtight and without assumption, otherwise he will single it out and use it to continue continue to operate without accountability. Now that I've given my thoughts on the document, let me get into the new allegations. For some reason, Parlo censors Pink's Twitter handle for no reason. They made a public accusation, so their username should not be censored. They claim to have been groomed by Pyro when they were 15 to 16, and Pyro being 19 to 20 at the time. Their age was in their bio and Pyrocynical followed them. Unfortunately for him, Parlo censored everything except for the proof Pyro followed them, still showing their Twitter handle iFunnyChef. The only proof shown is a potentially sexual art piece of his character, but there is no screenshots of their conversation shown. Parlo says that after consulting them, they are not currently willing to come out about their allegations. But what do they have to come out about? They apparently have no screenshots of their conversations with Pyro. There is no real proof of anything concerning Pink, and probably never will be, given their unwillingness to move forward. And this is a classic instance of Parlo throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. The next allegation was a user named Assault. Assault was 16 at the time of them and Pyro interacting. They alleged that they sent Pyro free fetish content from an artist, to which Pyro asked to see more of their fetish content Assault commissioned. The only thing is that Pyro requested to see their fetish content, but Parlo tries to claim Pyro sent more fetish content with another minor based on Assault's testimony. The DMs only prove he sent it rather than him sending content. Although their age was publicly on Twitter at the time, there's no indication that Pyro knew his age. Further, any claim of Pyro himself sending this user fetish art is an unproven allegation and should be treated as such. Abortion ASMR is a user who made allegations against Pyro almost a year before Ivory made his experience public. They claim their age to have been 15 when Pyro was 19. They removed their post after saying she was harassed by Pyro fans calling her a clout chaser, along with attempting to discredit and invalidate her post. In the DMs, which took place in September of 2016, Pyro sends fat fetish art, which ASMR says is cute. Pyro then asks whether they have Skype. Once they move to Skype, Pyro immediately offers, if you're into thick, like no meme, I can send you some. After which he sends light blobby fox commission and asks, what about this? Abort says it's good, and Pyro offers to find even thicker if you want. He then sends planet commission and says, the size of that gut is real nice. With Abort says, it looks so squishy. He then moves to the gas part of his fetish, saying he can send more, but it's like super gassy. I don't know if you're into that. After sending one of these images, Abort says she loves it, and Abort asks, like, you find it hot? Abort avoids the question and says the style is good. Pyro sends more thick and says, yeah, I love the gas, to be honest. Just eating tons of food and letting out all that hot gas. Abort affirms she was into it before thick, but couldn't find any good art. Pyro responds by giving them what I'd assumed to be considered some good art, saying, look at all that hot gas being pumped out. Apparently the DMs were not shown in full, but this is what was highlighted at the time. Abortion ASMR maintained that Pyro sent her a beast farting furry porn in 2022 on her still active profile, Fertile Bigfoot. Even Parlo admits it is unknown whether Pyro knew her age at the time, but there is also no proof shown of him checking, unsurprisingly. Without any more proof being shown, which is unlikely due to Skype clearing messages, this is just another example of Pyro engaging in sending sexual art with a minor without age verifying, but is much less severe than his engagement with Ivory. Miobos made allegations that Pyro commissioned him as a minor for NSFW material. Importantly though, Parlo admitted right out the gate that a lot of the evidence is just testimony. At best, Pyro knew of their account because they featured Mew's fan art and liked one of their posts. Parlo makes a giant leap in taking the testimony at its word that Pyro commissioned the art in the video. Without anything definitive, there is no reason to take these claims seriously at this point. Turk alleges Pyro sent him furry face-setting pornography of Foxy and Chica from FNAF when he was 15. This person said their age on Twitter publicly at least once, and after adding Pyro on Twitter frequently, was followed by him. Supposedly, months later, Pyro sent him furry porn saying, hello baby, so allow me to offer you a foxy ass as a blessing. They responded with K, to which Pyro responded, love you baby, XOXO. If this is all true, it is reckless and irresponsible at best. It's entirely possible Pyro didn't see the few tweets this person had mentioning their age, and it was apparently not in their bio. Even if Pyro knew his age, their age gap was smaller than 3 years. However, if this is true, it shows Pyro would indeed do roleplay with almost anyone, as he attests in his video response. Trippy Fox was 15 when their allegations with Pyro took place, and was in the friend group Pyro was in with Solid Shibe and Sive. He put together Pyro's 800k sub special. In March of 2024, Pyro had sent him furry fetish porn when they were 15, and claimed Pyro knew their age. In the messages, Pyro sent an explicit image, to which Trippy said, this can be us, with Pyro asking which one would he be. Trippy states Pyro should be the one on the left, to which Pyro says, go on Skype now and delete this DM. This is certainly a strange response, and does potentially show a pattern of Pyro wanting his more explicit conversations interviews to take place on Skype. The age gap between the two is about 3 years, making it much less severe than the Ivory case. Furthermore, as explained before, there's no proof of Pyro knowing his age, only testimony from Trippy at this point. At the end of Pyro's video response, he shows a piece of artwork he commissioned by Spoopy Scary Aliens, who was 15 at the time, with Pyro being 19. This began with Pyro noticing an art piece Spoopy made of Isona cuddling with a body pillow. After this, he followed Spoopy and DM'd them saying, "Not even thick." Pyro complimented their art and asked how old they were, to which they stated that they were 15. She eventually did make it for him. In his response, Pyro downplays the situation, saying the images were not pornographic. Despite the character having a large bulge in the front end, Ken was an artist who was at the time nearly 17, who alleges he was sent fetish content by Pyro. His bio showed he was 16. The art Pyro allegedly sent was merely suggestive and not explicit. There really isn't anything else to be said about these. The age gap isn't significant, and the art sent wasn't even explicit. Sokka was 15 at the beginning of his encounter with Pyro, and their age gap being nearly 4 years. His tweet was shown in one of Pyro's videos, $3 BuzzFeed versus 9,999 BuzzFeed, and he has posted multiple instances of alleged Discord conversations he had with Pyrocynical in 2016. The first conversation shown is a group chat where Pyro sends a screenshot of his entire conversation of furry fetish porn he commissioned unprompted. He claims Pyro sent him furry inflation porn in DMs, then deleted it. In a group chat with Pyro and his brother Chris, Saku's brother, says their birthday, affirming they are 16 at this time, with Pyro being 19, less than a 3-year age gap. Pyro sent more images of the NSFW fetish art after knowing this. And the worst of all of these even includes Cyrus, aka Wi-Fi Skeleton, a freak and notorious liar, testifying that Pyro apparently groomed him and that he knew Ivory's age. Cyrus is infamously unreliable and frequently lied, including about his own allegations, so his testimony should hold no weight whatsoever, and their inclusion is mystifying. If you want to know more about Cyrus, I will put 2 videos on screen that I think are somewhat decent in their coverage. To conclude this section, most of these allegations hold some weight, and several have little to no proof. They should be treated as such, and some, unless more proof is shown, should be disregarded entirely. Parlo uses these allegations as hard proof of the various points he is trying to paint a picture of, and this is reckless, and exactly how Pyro got away with it the last time. His jumping to conclusions without evidence and putting forward insufficient proof before platforming allegations and acting like they are credible does not do any favors. It merely makes Parlo seem biased and unreliable. Parlo even had a section going after Pyrocynical's fans, and originally was going to have a series of 3 videos on the creator, with the second one being entirely dedicated to his audience apparently. Not only is this unproductive, it makes Parlo seem like even more of a spurg, and his willingness to go after the audience of a YouTuber whose actions are spurred by the YouTuber's decisions in the first place. Groupthink and blind offenses are a natural side effect of a YouTuber with a large younger audience, and that is the only point that needs to be made about it. After all I've shown you today, here are my final thoughts on the Pyrocynical files. So much misinformation has been peddled throughout all of the circumstances surrounding Pyro. He essentially got away scot-free with reduced accountability. He has managed to lie, mischaracterize, and downplay situations to work for his benefit. Pyro's behavior is crystal clear when it comes to the handling of his allegations, and his credibility should be questioned. I hate I even have to clarify this, but do I think Pyrocynical is a pedophile? No. Do I think he's a groomer? Sure, people can debate in circles all day over the label, but it doesn't change the fact that the said autistic debating was what caused Pyro to get away with his egregious actions involving Ivory. Judging him solely off his actions, he has exhibited unjustifiable and reprehensible behavior. Tommy C put it the best all those years ago. It doesn't need to be grooming for this to be bad. Pyro, regardless of if it was grooming or not when it comes to Ivory or even the French girl, should be held accountable for what he did and the lies he spread to save his career. This has been the Pyrocynical Files. Peace.